Welcome to Human. I see people are still coming into the room. I'm really very much looking forward to this conversation with Alex Finley, former CIA officer, who is joining me. Welcome, Alex.
Hi, thanks for having me, Sasha.
Alex recently wrote an article about the connections between Jeffrey Epstein and Russia, and that is what we'll be talking about today. Of course, this comes after the Justice Department has released millions of files, with more that still have not been released. And we all know that this notorious man was entitled. A lot of this had to do with what he could buy and what he thought he could buy. Um, I want to read you a quote from what an Estonian official had to say in the last few days. Quote, "It's becoming increasingly likely that Epstein consciously or unconsciously served the interests of Russian intelligence. What the public has seen so far is probably just the tip of the iceberg." That was Marko Mihkelson, chairman of Estonia's Foreign Affairs Committee. And so this conversation will touch on the elements that connects Epstein to Russia and Russian interests, and talk about whether he actually was directed by the Kremlin, whether he was a useful idiot, whether this was really him using kompromat as currency. So, Alex, can we start by talking about one of the most concerning overlaps, and that is the women? When I first started reading about what Epstein had done, it was American women coming forward, talking about what had happened to them in his mansion in Palm Beach, in his mansion in New York City. But it turns out that it goes way, way beyond that.
Yeah, it seems to be that there was some trafficking of women, particularly from Eastern Europe and Russia. We've seen some evidence, again, like everybody else. I haven't read all of the files, but there certainly seems to be evidence pointing to that. In fact, to the point that the Poles have launched an investigation into this to see if any Polish women were trafficked. And they're increasingly looking at the ties between Epstein and Russian intelligence.
Yeah. So from 2012 and preparing for this, and let me just also caveat by saying I have not covered Epstein in many years myself, and there's no way anybody could read all of these documents. In 2012, someone emailed Epstein, quote, "I have two Russian girls for you to meet, one 21, another 24. And then the NFL team co-owner Steve Tisch discussed, quote, "Ukrainian and Russian girls." There are other reporters who are saying that many of the victims came from Belarus, Turkey, Turkmenistan, as well as Russia. Um, what else do you think about that?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways from all of this, and we'll go, I think, probably more into detail about this, is the networks that are used to do this. So the first thing to remember about Russia and a number of organizations within Eastern Europe, they function as a mafia. Russia itself is basically a mafia state at this point, where um, the intelligence services are a mafia and have taken over the tools of the state. So they use a number of these illicit networks, and Epstein, it seems, was using. mm, it seems likely. We don't have the direct evidence yet, but given the nature of what he was doing, it's almost certain that these networks overlapped. That they were using some of the same networks to traffic the women, to launder the money, um, because this is what you're dealing. You're dealing with mafias who are trafficking in people and cleaning the money. And a lot of the women were coming from Eastern Europe and Russia. So there almost certainly is some form of an overlap with Russian organized crime, Eastern European organized crime, and therefore with Russian intelligence.
And you had mentioned the money. Let's also talk about the fact that he was using banks that the United States has imposed sanctions on, Alfa-Bank being one of them. Um, why is that concerning? Tell us more about Alfa-Bank in what you know.
Well, these are banks that are known to be connected back to Putin and his main oligarchs. They've been used in the past. to get money out of Russia in order to use for Russian intelligence operations in the West. For example, a number of the election interference investigations that we've heard about, operations involving all kinds of active measures, buying politicians, buying journalists, buying influencers. All of that money has to somehow come out first. And these banks help to do that. In a number of cases, the oligarchs use these banks to sort of gather their money and then move it to the West. And they buy their Western assets through real estate, through yachts, through whatever, to sort of help clean that money. And then some of that money is meant to go to Russian intelligence operations. It's a little bit of an unspoken, well, not even so unspoken, but a little bit of a relationship between the oligarchs and the Kremlin. We know, for example, back from Mueller's investigation back in 2016, we know actually that Putin had quarterly meetings with his oligarchs, where they discussed, I'm going to let you loot these things and you're going to get rich and take that money. But in return, you're going to do a number of things for the state on my behalf.
Right. Yeah. And I'm even thinking back to Jan Marsalek, who was a man who worked on behalf of the Russians. He worked in finance and became an incredible asset for them, who planned some of these spy rings that we know, the Bulgarian minions in London, for example. And one of the first things that he did was move money around for the Russians when it came to paying for operations, paying for sources. It is a huge area of importance in terms of conducting intelligence operations. And as you noted in your Substack article, Alex, Senator Ron Wyden had revealed that according to the documents, there were more than 4,700 wire transfers totaling nearly $1.1 billion from a single account with, quote, multiple Russian banks, which are now under sanctions, and that this all related to sex trafficking.
Yeah, and just one quick note on Marsalek. He actually became CEO of Wirecard, which was these sort of all prepaid credit cards, which would be a great way to pay for an operation because you can't trace back to an individual who's using it. And again, this certainly looks like what Epstein was doing. There's, other emails that have come out that sort of describe money laundering.
Yeah,
Somebody with a big name will buy it, and then we're going to run these other people through it and resell it, and then voila, you have clean money on the other side.
right.
And again, as you said, the fact that he was doing a lot of this with these banks that are now sanctioned. These banks are sanctioned because our governments have evidence that these banks were involved in this type of in all kinds of illicit activities, and so that Epstein was banking with them. Not everybody who banks with these banks is illegal or doing something wrong, but we have enough evidence pointing to Epstein doing things that were wrong. So the fact that these were the banks that he was choosing to use tells us a little bit more about what was probably happening with that money.
Yeah, and interesting to note that Marsalek, last time I spoke with a reporter who was tracking him, was hiding out in Moscow. But let's also talk a little bit about his relationships with Russians who were literally involved in the country's economy. His relationship with Sergei Belyakov, who was then the deputy minister of economic development. Can you tell us more about him and what they did for one another?
Yeah, so Belyakov graduated actually from the FSB Academy back in the late 90s. There doesn't seem to be evidence that he went directly to work for the FSB, but given what we know about how the FSB and Russian intelligence generally works, that doesn't mean that he isn't actually working for the FSB and working for the state. So he moved into a few different sort of economic positions along the way. Um, Eventually, he led the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. This is widely known sort of as Putin's Davos. This is where they tried to bring in Western business people to attract investment into Russia. But again, something else that we know about um, how Russian operations work. This type of a get together, these types of events are never really just about investment. This is about making sure we can gain some kind of leverage over some of the very important people who attend. So they have models who are there. And the companies that sort of the agencies that run these models say, well, we have nothing to do with them once their time is over. If they choose to go up to a man's room on their own, they can. My guess is there's probably some more pressure actually to be doing certain things. And again, there would be cameras in the room, or the women would know to record certain things. Or even just put somebody in a compromising position and nothing has to actually happen, but you have one photo that can be used, or even just the gossip of it happening. This is how compromat, as we call it, compromising information, compromat, this is how it's created. And so these types of forums that Belyukov was helping to run certainly had an element of that going on as well. Interestingly, Belyukov now also works with Kirill Dmitriev, who is on the negotiating team for the Russians, dealing with Witkoff and Jared Kushner to do whatever this peace plan is for Russia, Ukraine, that never turns actually into a peace plan. So he's still around, and Epstein was working with him. Epstein had had a number of communications. One of the more interesting ones was Epstein went to Belyukov to say there is this Russian model who is threatening a number of American businessmen. Now, he calls it she's blackmailing them. There seems to be other evidence in there that some of these American businessmen who are named in there possibly participated in very unsavory, like not even just sexual abuse, but very hard physical, there's blood kind of abuse. None of it proven yet. This is just in the files. And Epstein goes to Belyukov to say, look, I'm having a problem basically with this woman. What can you do? And Belyukov says, I'll send you some information. And Belyukov comes back with who she is, how much money she's making, who she's in touch with. We don't know what that turned into. Did they stop her somehow, put pressure on her? I just don't know. But that's definitely one of the things that they were involved in. He also contacted him about getting visas for some people, getting himself a visa to go to Russia. And then Belyukov would go to Epstein to ask about how to get around sanctions and how to move money around.
Mm-hmm. So was this more opportunistic, or did it go deeper than that in your viewpoint? I mean, you described how there is this facade of economic development that is exploited for a longer term plan. Epstein was no fool here. He was very good at manipulating people. Was this sort of like a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours situation? And did he care that he would be bumping up against Russian intelligence? And obviously, this is speculation because there are only, certain pieces of information that we have.
Yeah, I really think of it like you said, yes, it's mutually beneficial. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. I really think it's easiest to think of these as mafia networks. And again, the networks are going to overlap, and there are going to be places where you and I can help each other out, type of a thing. I don't think that, well, I don't know, because the polls, again, are taking very seriously this idea that perhaps this entire thing was an operation set up by Russian intelligence. My guess is that organically or whatever, Epstein was going to do this really crappy behavior on his own. But because he was getting these, powerful people, powerful men, also as part of it, all of these networks sort of came together. So he had access. He had a number of things that Russian intelligence would have loved to exploit, and I can't imagine they wouldn't. He had access to powerful people. He had compromat on people. He knew how to move money around. And he was trafficking women through the same networks that these other guys, the Russian intelligence and Russian organized crime, are using. It just would boggle the mind that these things wouldn't overlap.
Yeah. And, you had mentioned how Tusk had announced that they will be investigating. We know that Norway is also launching an investigation, and this is because of a conversation where Epstein offered to discuss President Trump with Sergei Lavrov, who is Russia's foreign minister and has been for some time now. He emailed Norway's former prime minister, whose name I'm definitely going to mess up. Thorborn Jagland, but there's also like some J in there, in Thorborn. Quote, I think you might suggest to Putin that Lavrov can get insight on talking to me. Um, this was a June 24th, 2018 email that he wrote to Jagland. Is this to try to reach another limb of influence? Why is he now kind of taking his relationship with Trump and trying to provide insight to a top Russian diplomat?
It's a really good question. Um, and you have to wonder if it's just trying to sort of curry favor. Again, when you look at how these networks might work, we're all running in the same circles, and it may just be I understand what's sort of gonna win me a few points with this guy over here or with this person over here. So was it Epstein felt pressure to provide something? No, probably not. Did he know it would buy him goodwill that might bring him something good later? Yeah. Um, and we don't know if that meeting ever took place, if that connection was ever made. But almost, everybody who followed that Helsinki summit, and the press conference between Trump and Putin afterwards, something happened in that room. It was the two of them alone with Putin's translator. And they came out, and Putin had a smile, and Trump looked very unhappy. And then the press conference was just awful. That was where Trump said that he believes Putin over his own intelligence community.
In
Um,
regard to the
the,
Russian interference in the 2016 election,
yes,
which, and now
exactly.
here we are in the second term. And again, he's tried to undermine the intelligence community assessment that Russia tried to boost him and undermine, who would it have been at that time? Clinton, I guess, right? It's
Yeah.
hard to keep it all straight. But yeah, so, and sorry, back to you, jumping back into that Helsinki moment. Yeah.
Yeah, so the fact that this call happened, clearly Epstein was trying to say, look, before you have this summit, hey, I can help you to understand the guy. Now, was he offering compromise? Was he offering insight into Trump's personality and what pushes his button? I don't know. Why you're offering this at all is very weird, because you don't work. You're not Russian. You don't work for them. But again, what happens in these sort of mafia networks is, and again, the Russian state is one. Um, is there? There's no real rules, right? I mean, legal institutions are very weak. Rules are applied and laws are applied very differently to different groups of people, um, and so there's no real. This informal hierarchy amongst the mobsters sort of arises, and compromat and information on people and gossip on people, that becomes the currency, and people trade on it, and you're never super how you play on it is all very different, and sometimes not using the compromat, just the fact that the compromat exists or somebody thinks that you have it can change somebody's behavior. So it doesn't have to be Putin saying directly to Trump, "Hey, I heard from Epstein that they're compromising pictures of you," or something like that. It can just be as simple like, "Oh yes, I spoke with your friend Jeffrey the other day." Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Now Trump doesn't know if it actually happened. He has no idea what information was said, but that might change behavior just in and of itself. It's a bit like, nice house you got. There'd be a shame if something were to happen to it. You understand implicitly what the threat is.
Mhm.
Um, so again, we don't actually know if Epstein spoke with them. There's other evidence in the files that Epstein was pushing for a meeting with Putin, but it doesn't appear so far that ever actually happened. Um, but again, these relationships very clearly existed and were mutually beneficial, and symbiotic perhaps is a good word.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, just going to the DOJ site and typing in Putin, his name came up more than 900 times in that quick search. There is one FBI report marked secret, no foreign, meaning just for American eyes. It's from 2017. And it says that a confidential human source told FBI special agents, quote, Epstein was President Vladimir Putin's wealth manager. and provided the same service for Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe. Also a charmer, a real charmer before he croaked. But let's just keep it to Putin. Um, that is another document where is that confidential human source legitimate, credible? Was this something that the FBI was able to confirm? I mean, would Epstein manage the wealth of a guy like Putin? Probably, but why would Putin even want to have a guy like Epstein doing this? What would be the advantage for him?
Well, I think there's a few points to make here. One is we actually need to be very careful with all of these files that have come out. This is a problem with a huge dump like this is what it's telling us is that nobody has any faith anymore in our own Department of Justice and our own capability of doing investigations. So all of these files come out and it's sort of left to the internet mob to pull out and say what's important and what's not. Now, you also have very serious people and experts in their things who are digging through this, who will then pull out and say, maybe this was a real thing. Maybe this was a crank who called in and just said ridiculous things. And it's, we deal with this in intelligence. That lots of people give us information, and then you have to sort of prioritize and say, wait, let's put this in context. What makes sense? Who are the sources? Can we trust these sources? So the problem with just sort of throwing millions of documents out there is it's left to the internet to make some of those judgments. That's not to say that this isn't a credible source and a credible report. We just don't know yet. But I will say this about Putin's wealth. I don't think anybody managed Putin's money. I don't think Putin makes like the equivalent of $100,000 officially. So when you talk about Putin's money or somebody being Putin's wealth manager, we've heard this also about a number of the oligarchs. So again, what it seems more likely is Putin can have access to any of this whenever he wants because he's the Don. He's the top guy in his mafia. Um, but the oligarchs are moving money for him. Maybe Epstein was helping to move some of the money for the oligarchs. I doubt he was directly controlling any money directly for Putin and discussed that with him. But again, money that was coming in through the St. Petersburg Forum or the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is where Kirill Dmitriev now is running the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Was this money running through these same networks? Very likely, yes.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that even though he makes 100,000, obviously he has so much more money. And one of the things that Alexei Navalny, the late opposition leader, did, which really angered Putin so much, was making a documentary about this extraordinary palace that Putin has and going into just the astronomical levels of wealth that Putin has and hides. Just wanted to throw that out there for us. And I mean, the connections to Russian officials, we could go on. I mean, there are text messages and emails between Epstein and Vitaly Churkin, who was the permanent representative to the UN on behalf of Russia. He died in 2017. Interestingly, on the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, I went and looked at it right now. It says the outstanding Russian diplomat, quote unquote, died in harness. I don't know what that means, if it's just like some terrible translation, because like, what does that died in harness? I mean, I know we're talking about Epstein, so clearly like a harness wouldn't be so damn far-fetched, but I think he had some kind of heart issue. In any case, they planned a bunch of get-togethers. It just seems as though Epstein's international life kept having overlaps with these Russian officials.
Yeah, yes, definitely. And then on the other side, he was cultivating these relationships with very powerful men in the West. And what one of the things I write about this in the Substack piece, one of the things that really surprised me reading the parts of the files that I did read is just sort of how careless and carefree these men were. They very openly emailed about things. They allowed themselves to be photographed with the victims. And it's treated, they're talking just among, like we're talking amongst ourselves, but there's zero concern about counterintelligence threats, which
Zero.
is really weird because none of these people are stupid, right? I mean, these are powerful men who certainly have had to think along the way about how something can be used against me. They have gone through, opposition, digging through everything, digging through their trash. So they know and they understand there is a counterintelligence threat out there, and yet among this group, they were very open and sort of carefree about it. And I think that goes back to this sort of mutually beneficial relationship that everybody had. We're all in the circle of trust. We all have compromat on everybody else.
Yeah.
And so nobody's, we may quietly trade on certain things behind the scenes, but we're holding things to sort of keep leverage over everybody else, and that's this informal hierarchy that I was talking about. Which, in fact, there's a Russian word for it, which is sistema, this idea that there is this informal hierarchy that exists because we all think everybody has something else on everybody else.
hmm I think that's a really good point. I'm glad you're making it. To me, I mean, yesterday I watched the docu-series called Filthy Rich by James Patterson on Netflix. And just to kind of refresh myself on the general thrust of what we saw from the early years with Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, the documentary is nowhere close to catching up to where we are now. But the level of entitlement and arrogance of these men, I mean, it's shocking what they think that they can have, what they think they can get away with here. And you're right that there is this kind of like brazen openness and almost like a normalizing with one another that we see in these documents. And how many people have been disgraced, but then also don't seem to want to take accountability and want to try to distance themselves by saying that they didn't really know what was going on. It is part of a system, if we want to make a direct translation from the Russian term you just shared. But then there are also women who I want to bring up here. I mean, before he died in his will, just days before, he set aside $50 million, nearly a 33-carat diamond, loose diamonds, and numerous property for a woman who was from Belarus, Karina Shuliak. And I believe that he was wanting to marry her. They had been dating. She reportedly came to the US in 2010 at 20 years old. He paid for her dentistry at Columbia University. A lawyer who represented her, represented victims, I should say, said that sometimes Epstein would use same sex marriages to get citizenship for girls he wanted to keep in the country. Where does all of this fit into this conversation? And we're not trying to say that this woman is necessarily working on behalf of the Russians or anything, but it is notable that this woman exists and that he had this relationship with her. And we know about the relationship between Russia and Belarus as exhibited in the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, I have not looked into her at all, and I haven't read those parts of the file, so I'm not sure. Same. I mean, I have read that same information. I'm not sure yet what to think of it. Was she a victim in this? Was she being? I mean, most likely she was a victim in any case, but was she being sent by the Russians to do something? Was she trafficked by Epstein, or did she really like the guy because they met in the right circles and they really fell in love? I just don't know. That part I don't have any insight onto her at this time.
And when we get these records, sometimes it just leads to more questions and the mysteries continue. I want to move on to tactics now with you, Alex. And I'm going to announce that unless you're watching this live, this is going to be the end of the free portion of this conversation. To get the rest of the recording, you need to be a paid subscriber. This is the only way that I can keep doing this reporting. And I'm so grateful that Alex is here with me to do it.